Hey guys, it's Austin from Jones Bros Garage, and today I wanted to talk about a topic that I've been meaning to get to for a long time. And now, this is something that I didn't completely understand when I was a beginner rider, and I feel like a lot of beginner riders don't quite understand this. I made a video a while ago on if you should start on a 600, and this is a question that I encountered a couple times in that video. I've encountered it in real life, and I have some examples of that. But basically, the question is, why is a 650 class bike more appropriate for a beginner than a 600 class bike? And today I just wanted to talk about mainly the power differences and why typically a 600cc motorcycle in the Supersport class is going to be faster than a 650cc motorcycle in the sport class. Now, a funny thing that's happened to me a few times, and if you ride a super sport bike you might relate to this, is to give you an example, I had my 650 Ninja at the time, and there was an older guy I knew that had a Harley, and he was asking me questions about my bike, and I said, oh yeah, it's a 650cc, and he said something along the lines of,
oh, a 650cc? My bike's an 1800.
And basically inferred that my bike is slow, which obviously, as a sport bike rider, that sounds ridiculous and it makes no sense because, the fastest bikes in the world are under 1000cc, and that really just doesn't mean anything. But a lot of people, they don't understand that, and they think that engine displacement correlates with power or, the speed of a bike, when in reality it doesn't. Now, I'll just start out by giving a few examples of bikes where you would think maybe the bigger bike might be quicker, but in reality it's not. So, the Ninja ZX6R, it's a 636cc, the Ninja 636. It makes 127 horsepower, and it revs to 15,500 RPMs, okay? Now compare that to the Ninja 650. That bike makes 67 horsepower and only revs to 9,500. So there's a huge difference between a 636 and a 650. Then an R6 makes 118 horsepower and an R7 makes 72. A Ninja ZX10R makes 203 horsepower from 998 cc's. Whereas a Ninja 1000 SX, it's kind of more of a sport touring style bike, I guess you could say. It makes 138 horsepower from 1043 cc's. So you have a bigger motor in the 1000 SX, but it makes a huge amount less power than the 998 in the ZX10R does. I mean, that's not an insignificant amount. That's over 70 horsepower. That's a pretty big jump. And just to further elaborate on this, I have a Panigale V2. It's a 955cc, and it makes 155 horsepower, where the V4R is a 998cc, so it's not much bigger, but it makes a huge 221 horsepower. So just a massive difference. When you're talking about motorcycles, a 50 horsepower jump is huge. Like, that could be the difference between what I would consider a beginner bike and what an experienced track rider would want to be riding. So when you're talking about vehicles that are so light, 50 horsepower is a huge difference. 100 horsepower is massive. I mean, a 600 class bike, they're typically not that far above 100 horsepower. So you're almost talking a jump from like a moped to an R6. Now, the reason why this is because, well, primarily, and in 99.9% of cases, engine layout. Now, these beginner bikes, I would say, or the 650 class bikes, you could call them sport bikes also, they usually have a twin, like a V-twin, and that would be 2 cylinders. So basically they're only working with 2 cylinders, right? Whereas these bigger, more powerful bikes that you would call super sport, and I would say, are horrible for a beginner, they usually have an inline four or a four cylinder, like in the case of the Ducati, it's a V4 technically. But you see what I mean is that a 650cc twin motor is most of the time not going to make the power of a 600cc inline four motor. It's just the way the motors are laid out and the configuration. That's like the really basic way of looking at it, is just twins versus inline fours. And now there's more complicated things to it than that, like how high the bike revs, and how it's tuned. But the basic gist of it that you could apply to pretty much any bike you could think of is that a twin is not going to be as quick as an inline four. With the power and the motors aside, when you're talking about a 650 versus, let's say a Ninja 650 versus a ZX6R, right? Like, when I had my Ninja 650 for a while, my brother had an R6. And some of my friends that didn't ride, they would think, I actually had one of my friends say,
"Oh, well, your Ninja is faster than his R6 then."
Assuming because it's a 650. And I basically had to explain to him it's not. But that's not the only difference. So you would assume that a 650cc bike is like physically bigger than a 600cc bike. And while the motor displacement is, that's not usually true for the actual stature of the bike. And to give you an example, a Ninja 650 has a seat height of 31.1 inches, whereas a ZX6R has a seat height of 32.7 inches. So actually, the 600cc bikes, the Supersport bikes you could say, they tend to sit a lot higher than the 650 class bikes or the sport bikes. And the reason for this is because they're more oriented for the track. They have higher pegs and a higher center of gravity so that they could lean over easier and quicker. So it makes sense when you think about it like that. And also the 600 or the Supersport style bikes, they'll tend to have a wider rear tire to accommodate more power and more performance on the track. And when you talk about the difference between a 650 and a 600, typically you're thinking bikes like the MT-07, Ninja 650, even the R7. I don't know about the Aprilia RS660. I forget if that's a twin or not, but we'll leave that out for now. But anyhow, you're usually talking about a bike that would be a twin. And when you're talking about a 600 class bike, it's pretty much always an inline four. The CBR 600RR, ZX6R, Gixxer 600, R6, they're all inline fours. Well, they tend to have really different power bands. So where a twin motor, they tend to have more torque down low and a more linear power band, where inline fours, they really tend to make all of their power up high and have more torque up high. So it's almost like, it would be equivalent to like on a car having a big turbo. Like if you ride an R6 up to 6,000 RPMs, it's like nothing. It doesn't feel like a lot of power. But then when you get above 6,000, you just get totally hit in the face with power and torque. And the bikes, the inline fours, they're just designed to be like that for the track, because you want to be high up in the RPMs. You're not really going to be like, stopping at red lights. So the 650 class bikes or sport bikes, they're more street oriented than the super sport bikes are. And that's another reason that I usually would recommend them for a beginner and not a 600 class or super sport bike. And like I mentioned earlier, this could even apply to a bigger bike, because like the ZX10R is a track focused bike, and it's an inline four and just makes a brutal amount of power and doesn't have a very forgiving power band. Whereas the Ninja 1000 SX is more of like a street going version. And it actually, doesn't make a whole lot more power than a 600 Super Sport would, yet it's a bigger 1000cc class bike. So the final point that I'll make on this video, just kind of to wrap it all up, is a lot of people that ride, including me, if you've ever been on a 650 class bike or, a twin, I actually feel like I'm quicker on the twin. Like, I feel like if I would just go all out on some back roads, I definitely would be quicker on a Ninja 650 than an R6. until you get to like a pretty high skill level. And the reason for that is, like I mentioned, the power band, honestly, is the main reason. I mean, it helps also having less power because you're able to just give it more throttle, and you're not as, trying to hold yourself back. Like, it's a lot easier to ride a slow bike fast than it is to ride, well, a fast bike fast, honestly. But I hope that helps explain to you guys, why a 650 class bike is not usually as fast as a 600, and why people say, oh, you should start on a Ninja 650, but then, you might reply, well, how about an R6? And they'll say, no, that's horrible. I understand that could be a really confusing thing for people that are trying to get into the hobby, and it confused me too a lot when I first started, but it basically just comes down to power. The 600 class bikes, they tend to make more power than the 650 class, and that is just completely due to the engine layout. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them below, and I'll try my best to answer all of them. If you enjoyed the video or you learned anything useful, then don't be afraid to go ahead and touch that subscribe button, because it's the best way you could support me. Bye. I appreciate you guys checking out my video, and I hope you learned. I appreciate you guys checking out my video, and I hope you learned something. I need a different outro than that. That's not too good.